a beginner's guide to vintage and antique crochet. Perfect video if you're a beginner, if you just want a refresher, or if this just simply piques your curiosity, but your favorite hobbies happen to be with working with wood. It doesn't matter. I find educational stuff very entertaining. So let's get into it. First things first, the patterns. There are no tutorials or picture tutorials for anything vintage or antique outside of how to do a double crochet, US, how to do a single crochet. I'm speaking in US terms. Of course, we're going to be covering US and UK. Because there are no tutorials, there's no how-to. You have to know how to read patterns. If you want to learn how to read patterns, welcome aboard. This is a great video to start with, because if you can nail antique and vintage patterns, you can, like they say, if you can drive in New York, you can drive anywhere. Okay, of course, I say that as somebody from America. I don't know what driving is like anywhere else around the world. Okay, so first things first, antique and vintage patterns. Vintage, antique, UK, US. Now, a lot of the patterns that come from the Victorian era don't necessarily mean that they came from Victoria, England. Everyone learned how to crochet using the same stitch terms and techniques, which are the original UK terms and techniques. So even pattern writers circa 1830, 1870 were using UK terms for their American written or Canadian written patterns. They were ultimately, as we get into the 20th century, these two become the most universally known ways of reading and writing crochet patterns, translated into different languages, Spanish, Mandarin, things of that nature, but the foundation is the same. So we have to understand the foundation of the stitch terms before we even understand how to read the patterns. So let's start at the beginning. This isn't the very beginning. This book is from 1870. As far as we know, the first written crochet patterns came out of the 1830s in France. And then 1842, I believe, in England had the first, not England, Scotland had the first English written patterns. Okay. Most of these books, some people ask me, how do you know these things? How do you know that that's what the stitch term means? Because most of these books, and this is what I have physically, I have dozens of these books on my computer, and pretty much all of them are very good about giving you the stitch terms and the definitions to those terms. I have noticed, though, that in a handful of very popular publications, very popular books from the 1800s, they're giving you the stitch term and definition for that book. That's the stitch terms and definitions that designer chose to use. They don't always match up with what the common knowledge is. For example, the term long. I found a small handful of patterns written in both US, they're both US written and UK written. They both use the term long for a half double crochet, but what was more commonly known is that long back in that day was what we call a US double crochet or a UK treble crochet. So, and then also the term changed at the turn of the century when a long double crochet was where you pull through one loop, then pull through two, pull through two. So it changed. It has three different meanings. If you're trying to work a vintage, beautiful antique pattern and they're asking for long crochet and it somehow isn't measuring upright, it's probably because you're supposed to be using a half double crochet and not a double crochet. So let's look at what these authors, these many different people contributed to writing these patterns in this book, but they all agreed on the stitch terms. So they give you a brief definition of crochet to their knowledge. And then we get into what the terms are. What do they mean? Double foundation chain, purl foundation chain. I mean, we're covering some things here that we just don't use anymore. So here we go. What is a slip stitch? What is a double stitch? I got to take the cover off so I don't ruin it. This is a 1970 reproduction of an 1870 book. Isn't that wonderful? The ribbed stitch. So they're teaching you what they mean. Now, the slip stitch, it's quite unique that a UK book, this is a UK book, would use the term slip stitch in 1870 as most commonly known. The term single crochet was meant to be used for a slip stitch. Currently, in UK crochet terminology, single crochet does not exist at all. They just don't use it. It's nowhere in anything. Slanting stitch, double stitch. Cross stitch, treble stitch, long treble stitch, long double. So you can see it's really confusing for those of us on this side of the pond to understand what a lot of these terms mean because of the way we learned how to crochet. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a difference of crochet cultures. It's just a difference of language. So let's go over what is a long double. A long double in Victorian era UK terms is a half double crochet. For this stitch, wind cotton round the needle. Just go around it once. Insert it into the back part of the stitch. Now, this back part of the stitch, somebody made a comment, asked in a comment in my messy mystery video, why did you only work in the back loop? Did I miss something? Absolutely not. You missed nothing. It was common practice in the Victorian era to only work, and that's for both US and UK, to only work in the back loop only, as it creates a lovely texture that they really liked. So it was just common practice. As common as it is for us to go under both loops now, it was that common to only go under the back loop. It was just what you did. Okay, into the back part of the stitch, draw the cotton out as a loop. Wind the cotton again round the needle and cast off together the two loops and the loop formed by winding the cotton round the needle. That creates a half double crochet. Treble stitch. The reason it's important to go over these stitches is because if you want to play with Victorian era patterns, doesn't matter where they were written as far as UK or US go, these are the common terms for both. That's just what it is. So it could be quite confusing if you are a modern crocheter, which you are because you're alive now, trying to figure out why they're asking for a treble whenever the picture looks like a double. So let's actually play with some stitches from the Victorian era. This is the book that we have been working out of as of the last month and a half. And this book is from 1879. So these are the stitch terms from all those patterns that I have been making as of late. So let's go ahead and look at a chain stitch, which has never changed. A chain stitch consists in merely drawing the thread through the last loop. Just like that. Okay, so let's make some chain stitches, and I am using a vintage plastic hook. And I really like it. It's got an interesting, really narrow head. Okay, single crochet. Here's where I talked about how single crochet in Victorian era UK stitch terms is a slip stitch. Single crochet is to insert the needle in a loop of the preceding row, then draw the thread through both the loop and the stitch at once. That is a slip stitch. So let's do that. Insert the needle into the loop of the preceding row. Then draw the thread through both the loop and the stitch at once. Slip stitch. Okay, double crochet. Again, in the US, we know this as pull through two, pull through two. This is a Victorian era UK stitch term, and it's a modern era UK stitch term. Double crochet is to draw the thread This is a single crochet, by the way. This is what we know as a single crochet. Double crochet is to draw the thread through a loop in the lower row, then draw it through the other 2 stitches. You'll note it does not say to yarn over. So double crochet is to draw the thread through a loop in the lower row, then draw it through 2 stitches. Single crochet. This is a UK double crochet, even in today's modern UK stitch terminology. A treble. In the US, we know this as yarn over twice. In the UK, this is yarn over once because this is the equivalent to a US double crochet. Treble is to put the cotton over the needle. Again, just yarning over once for a modern US double crochet, modern UK treble crochet. Treble is to put the cotton over the needle and insert the latter into a loop. Draw the cotton first through the loop, then through 2 stitches, then again through the last 2 stitches. So we cotton over the needle, and they do call them needles, and that is the appropriate term for what this tool is. We call it a crochet hook, but crochet is French for hook. So when we say crochet hook, we are essentially saying hook hook. So technically this is a crochet needle. Okay, so cotton over the needle and insert the ladder into a hook. Draw the cotton first through the loop, then through 2 stitches, then through 2 stitches. And that is a US double crochet, UK treble crochet. There we go. Okay, and then a long treble is where you yarn over twice and then complete your stitch by pulling through 2, pulling through 2, and pulling through 2 three times after first yarning over twice. In the US, we call this a treble crochet. In the UK, back then and still today, they call this a double treble. Now, a long double in Victorian antique terms is a half double crochet, because a double crochet is what we call a single. So a long double back then was a half double crochet. So there you go. Those are the basic stitches you're going to need to know to work just about any Victorian era pattern. If there are special stitches used in any of the patterns featured in a book, they will be sure to note those special stitches just for the pattern in just that book. Work up some chains really quick. So there are now 2 stitches on my hook. These were called stitches, much like in tricot crochet. These are called stitches, much like in knitting. These are called stitches. So they consider this a double crochet because there are 2 stitches on the hook. We call it a double crochet because we pull through both of them one time. They call this a treble stitch, what I'm about to do, because there will be 3 stitches on the hook. There you go. Now there are 3 stitches on the hook, and we yarn over and we pull through once and pull through twice. And that's why we call it a double crochet, because you pull through twice. We call this a treble crochet because you pull through 3 times. 2, 3. There you go. So they call it a double treble because it's just making a double crochet but bigger. So, that was the simplest way to word that. We call it a treble because we pull it through 3 times. That's the only difference is the stitch terms. The definitions are solidly the same. So let's look at the stitch terms from completely different publication. These patterns all come from the 1880s and the 1890s, so only 10 years difference. Actually, no. So this is 1879. These are 1880 and 1890. These are Victorian era. Let's look at the stitch names. Chain stitch, single crochet. Let me get you down here. Here we go. I might sound a little funny when I zoom in, the audio changes. Single crochet, slip stitch, short or double crochet, single crochet. So you have Weldon's name, which Weldon is a London publication. This comes from England. This is current American name. This book, this specific book that put all these patterns together, came out in the 1970s. Okay. Long double crochet, half double crochet. Yes. Ordinary treble, double crochet, double treble, treble crochet. Treble, treble, double treble, tricot crochet, Afghan stitch. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, in here they're calling it a half double crochet, but if some of you remember, we worked quite a few patterns where they called for a long treble, and when you look at the photo, it is legitimately, without a doubt, a double crochet. And those could have been, I don't remember exactly if they were American authors, but likely they were. Likely they were American pattern writers putting out stitch terminology that is like UK stitch terminology, but different. And let's get into, when did the stitch terms change? Okay, now when did the stitch terms start to change between the US and the UK? Now, this is solely based on the numerous patterns that I have looked at, played with, and worked with. I would say, I'm just stitching for the sake of stitching, by the way. I would say that they really started to change sometime within the 1870s, and I would say mid to late 1870s. I feel like it might have something to do with the US's bicentennial and, this like spark of patriotism and just wanting to have US crochet pattern writers wanting to have their own, identity in stitch terms and things of that nature. Now, all of that is what I would call an educated guess, but it's still just a guess. So none of that is written in stone anywhere that I could reference for you. It's correlation, mostly the fact that the stitch terms really started to change in the 1870s, and America celebrated its centennial in 1876. So to me, that makes sense. And then by the turn of the century, so by the Edwardian era, as far as stitch terms go in the US, it was pretty much locked in that these are going to be the US stitch terms, and that's just the way it wound up being. And it got taught, handed down, and so that just became the norm for us here in the US. So it's just a matter of different stitch terms. That's it. The definitions are identical. It's only the terms that changed. And so now here we are, 2024, and these are just the terms that we grew up learning. Okay, moving on. The reason why this can be very frustrating, though, is because no two stitch terms are alike. It seems like half of the time, maybe less than half of the time, if I don't want to exaggerate. Because if you go back even farther, this is from the 1840s. So let's look up. I used most of these. I have this book on my computer, so I can replenish this book. But I used most of these our first year of doing mystery patterns. And in the 1840s and 1850s, you're going to find the term plain used an awful lot. Netted, useful carriage bag. Okay. Again, this is from 1846. Worked in plain double crochet. That is a single crochet. And often you will find they won't even use the word double. They will just say plain. And plain means it's a modern US single crochet, and it's also a modern UK double crochet. Plain is a single crochet. Okay, and so if you are interested in that pattern, go ahead and take a screenshot of it and give it a go and see if you can make it after you're done watching this video. Probably be the oldest pattern that you've ever worked on. it says here that we need 8 thread. I can never pronounce this right, but I believe it's pronounced basically like China. China wool. We're going to get into the other important parts about getting into antique and vintage crochet, which is materials. You can't make it if you don't have the right materials. Okay, so it is super important to get the basics down of vintage stitch patterns. So here we go. Write these terms down. Everything is going to be in UK terms. Everything. It's your job to translate it into US terms if you are in the US, or if you learned how to crochet with US terms, as I know some Canadians, some Australians, and some people in the UK learned with US terms. So a UK single crochet is a modern US slip stitch. A UK double crochet is a modern US single crochet. A UK treble crochet is a modern US double crochet. A UK double treble is a modern US treble crochet. Most patterns don't go beyond those basic terms right there, except for what you saw here. They were getting into teaching you how to do the double long treble. We don't usually, in my experience, I have over 200 videos on this channel. We almost never use this. So it's not that important to get into it. I really, truly believe that. This is a wonderful book. I found this one online. Just go ahead and type it in and you should be able to find it. This is the 1870 version. There are 2 versions. This is the blue book. There's also a red book. I have the red book, but it's in digital copy form. Okay. So that's a little bit about antique crochet. Let's get into vintage crochet. We will start with this. This was an extremely popular book in 1940s. I'm going to cover up that person's address. Even though they do not live there anymore, the family could still own that house. Isn't that lovely? May 19th, 1947. Enjoy, Mary, love, Evelyn, Evan, Gavin, Gwen, maybe? Gwen, G-W-E-N, Gwen. It's Gwen. Miss Haley, oh, isn't that lovely? Okay, I don't want that address to be shown. This book does come from 1947, and it was an extremely, 1946. It was an extremely popular book in its day. It did go over the stitch terms. This is a U.S. book, written and printed book, so everything in here is in more or less modern to today stitch terms. The techniques are all basically the same. It's a really fun book, but if you want to read a vintage pattern, not antique pattern, vintage pattern, first things first, what materials are we going to use? We have here pearl cotton size 5, 4 balls, and a steel crochet hook number 1. First things first, I would highly advise you to jump on eBay and invest in some vintage steel crochet hooks that you can get. I buy them all the time. I love them. I have lots and lots of vintage steel crochet hooks. Many of them were gifted to me. Many of them I purchased. Lots and lots. Your modern steel crochet hooks are not going to have these size indicators. Your modern steel crochet hooks, of which I have a lot right here, a full set. These are going to give you millimeters. That number is misleading. That's not going to match up to the vintage numbers. I don't even know what these numbers are in reference to, as most people just go over the millimeter. So if you really want to get into vintage crochet, and a lot of it is done in steel, with steel hooks. For example, this ascot, done with a hook number 1. Just go ahead and invest. These are my antique hooks. Of course, I have my Susan Bates blended in here because Susan Bates are my favorite vintage steel crochet hook brand. I absolutely love the tapered inline hook. I find it my hook almost never slips off of these Susan Bates hooks. They're the best. And the Susan Bates hooks, even the tiniest of hooks, has that inline. Look at this here. This is a number 14 hook, and it still has that inline. These are just simply the best steel crochet hooks. And you can find these on eBay, but I highly recommend investing. Now, let's look for a number 1 hook. The most common hooks you're going to find online to buy are the boy hooks, and they work just fine. They're great hooks. I just happen to have a personal preference. These hooks were gifted to me from a very good friend of mine, Miss Rosemary, whom I haven't heard from in a long time. If you're watching, Miss Rosemary, please say hi. These are, let's see here. What is the brand on these? These are Leeward's hooks. These are very old. Here is a number 1 hook right here in the Leewards. There we go. Pretty good size hook. Let's see what the equivalent is. You also should get yourself one of these. No, I'm thinking it's a 2.75. So it's equivalent to a modern 2.75. Okay. So that pattern calls for a hook number 1, which we have right here. And it also calls for a pearl cotton size 5. This is a pearl cotton size 5. Pearl cotton, as you can see, has merlin hair on it, but it's also very textured cotton. Do you see how it has all those ripples and bumps all over it? Very textured. That is what you are looking for whenever any pattern calls for a pearl cotton. It doesn't mean that it's shiny. It means that it has these ripples and bumps on it. So with this thread and this hook, I can make this ascot. Let's look at the pattern. If you can follow a video tutorial, you can read a pattern. So here we go. I'm going to read this to you in crochet tutorial style, but follow along with the pattern. Okay, starting at the short end, let's chain 80 to measure 9 inches. Okay, first row, let's work a treble crochet in the 5th chain from the hook. Do you see that TR? That's treble. Now, the little asterisk here and the little asterisk here means it wants you to repeat what's between those two symbols a certain number of times. So we're going to treble in the 5th chain from the hook. Now, chain 3, skip 3 chains and treble crochet, work a treble crochet in the next 2 chains. And of course, they're giving you figure 59 right here. They're telling you what that looks like right there. Repeat from right here. So repeat from here across 15 spaces. Then chain 1 and turn. Now let's start the 2nd row. Let's go ahead and single crochet into the first 2 trebles. Now we're going to start another repeat. See the little symbol? Chain 3, skip 3 chains, and let's single crochet into the next 2 trebles. Let's go ahead and repeat that all the way to the end, ending with a single crochet in the last treble and in the turning chain, according to figure 59. Okay, so that is, I mean, you can read a pattern. You 100% can read a pattern. You already know. If it says SC, you know that means single crochet. 100% you know that that's what that means. If it says DC, it means double crochet. If it says TR or TC, it means treble crochet. So you can read these patterns. You can read any pattern. Let's look at this one here. This one here is a little newer. This comes from, I believe, the 70s. Let's see here, 1977. This has a lot of everything: sewing, embroidery, crochet. Here is crochet. Obviously, it was easy to get into because I read that part a lot. That's knitting there. Knitting. Yeah. Okay. An introduction to crochet. Look how pretty that is. They're going to give you a history of crochet. Nobody's history is exactly the same because nobody really knows the history of crochet, you know, beyond the late 1700s, early 1800s. Really, nobody actually knows. Everybody wants to claim it for themselves, but nobody knows where it came from. So again, these books are great. They're going to teach you, this is written in US terms, I can tell, because there is a single crochet. That's another thing. If you ever want to figure out if a pattern is a US or UK, just look for single crochet. Almost every pattern has single crochet in it, and UK patterns will not have that. They will have double crochet. So yeah, it's no different here as far as how to read a pattern goes. So we need 6 ounces of knitting worsted. That's going to be your Aran weight or your number 4 worsted weight. First round, using color A, work 2 chains to count as your first single crochet. You see how that says SC. Working 15 single crochet into the ring, join with a slip stitch to second of first 2 chains. Round 2, little fly, shoe fly, using color A, 5 chains, CH is chain, so 5 chains to count as first half double crochet and 3 chains. So you can read patterns if you can follow a video tutorial and you hear us say all the time single crochet, half double crochet. We'll just break that down into its initial letters. DC, double crochet, HDC, half double crochet. You can do this easy. So let's look at something else. Let's look at material. Material in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, the 70s, the 60s. If you're working clothing items, a majority of the material they're going to ask for is a number 10 crochet cotton, which is this right here. They're going to ask for a number 4 worsted weight or an Aran weight, which is this right here. They're going to ask for a DK or sport weight, which is, I don't have any sport weight next to me, but all the sport weight yarns are labeled as sport weight or DK. So that's the latter half of the century. At the start of the century, the majority of clothing items from the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, they're going to ask for thicker threads. This is a fashion 3 thread that you're going to find very common at the turn of the century for clothing. I would say more or less around the time of World War I, so the 1910s on up. Fashion 3 and size 5 thread. These are going to be your most common for purses, hats, clothing. That's what they're going to ask you for. We also have a crochet cord. This is size 18. Now, if you are working with a pattern that calls for cord, the cord size is totally different. So fortunately, cord wasn't really used a lot in the Victorian era, but in the 20th century, it was used a bit here and there, and they do specifically say which gauge, and the gauges have not changed. So in the equivalent of an 18 is this right here, size 5 crochet cotton thread. They're both the same size. Okay, let's look at UK pattern, vintage UK pattern instead of an antique UK pattern. Well, technically this is antique, isn't it? 1906 is officially antique, but it is a 20th century pattern. So we are out of the Victorian era. We are into the Edwardian era. They call for 7 balls of crochet cotton number 30. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, this is number 30 thread. It's essentially kite string or dental floss. This is number 10 thread, one of the more common sizes of threads. Let's look at the difference. Very, very small, that size 30. This is not the smallest. Let's just take a look at some of the smallest, as some of these patterns, one in particular that I'm getting ready to work on, just a moment and I'll show you, comes out of one of these old-time crochet patterns and designs. This is from summer of 1981, but the patterns in here all come from the Victorian and, you know, more antique eras. So you have your 40s and 50s, but you also have some Victorian designs. Now, here is one I'm getting ready to work on with all of you. And this is from 1915. Isn't that beautiful? I've always wanted a crochet picture frame. But look here, it calls for your choice of size 40, size 50, and size 60. Now let's put that into perspective. What I have here some Busilla crochet cotton from 1918. And isn't this interesting? Let's look at this really, really quick. I have to be careful. I don't want to tear this. This has an advertisement in it. Just a moment. I don't want to tear this. Assure you, I did not tear it. It literally came out this way. I do have 3 more of these with perfectly intact advertisements on the inside. So this one here was just unfortunate. But you can see it advertises for any of those patterns there. Look at that one there, the gentleman. Doesn't he look so dapper? And if you write to them and send in your 10 cents, there you go, 10 cents, you can pick up one of these patterns. There you go. So let's look at the difference between size. Oh, I also wanted to show you that the picture frame I'm going to be working on, I found to be a little too big with the size 60. Yes, it was too big for what I wanted. So I am choosing, this was a gift from a viewer, to go down to size 80. I do have size 90 thread. That is the smallest thread I own. So these both come from basically the same era. These are more white. This is supposed to be white. This is what happens if you don't store your cotton in a protective, you know, way. I have already started that picture frame pattern. Here is my starting chain with size 80 thread. Let's look and see what size 80 thread looks like compared to size 60, compared to size 30, compared to size 10. I also have size 20, but I just don't have it next to me. Okay, so the smallest is the size 80. Again, I also have 90. Okay, there is size 60. Here is size 30. Size 30 don't seem so small anymore. And then here is the most popular, size 10. And there you go. That is what all of those sizes look like. Pretty wild. Pretty wild. Now, for this size 80 thread, I am using a vintage size 14. And that is the size of that. Now for the more common number 10 thread, a number 7 is used, and that is the equivalent of a modern 1.65 to 1.65 millimeter. Get into another antique stitch term called tricot, T-R-I-C-O. From what I've learned in the comments, it is French for knitting. I believe it means knitting with a hook. Knitting, crochet, crochet knitting, hook knitting. It's just the same as Tunisian crochet or Afghan crochet. You just use a Tunisian crochet stitch. So if you ever see a pattern calling for tricot or to work in common plain tricot, that is the Afghan stitch, the plain, simple Afghan stitch, and that is just Tunisian crochet. Patterns will even call for a bone hook. Of course, you can always substitute a bone hook for any other hook, but here I have some real bone and some fake bone hooks. These ones here are made by Susan Bates. They are Bakelite. They were made in the 50s and 60s to mimic a bone hook, as this is what the Victorian era bone hooks looked like. This is a genuine Victorian era bone hook. Let me get this straight down. You can see how stained it is, how pitted it is. It's actually very glassy smooth, but Susan Bates decided to come out with a line of hooks in the 50s and 60s that pretty much were a plastic-ish, it's Bakelite, replica of the bone hooks. But these are the genuine bone hooks. This one here is very clever. It's a crochet hook on one end and a knitting needle on the other. Some of the crochet hooks or the bone hooks from that era are double-sided, so you get two different crochet hooks. You'll have two different crochet hooks, one going small, one going big, but a lot of them have broken over the years. So this is a broken hook. This is a broken hook. This is a fully intact hook. This is another one. You can also tell these bone hooks, they're always bent. They are almost always bent. This is a lovely bone crochet hook. The majority I got from the UK. I ordered them off of Etsy. Here's a double-sided crochet hook, bone hook. And you can get a really good look at just what that looks like. Here you go. I think this one is a little newer as it's more white. From what I have seen, the yellower it is, the older it is. And I have some that are really, really yellow. Look at how dirty that one is. This is a bone hook. You can really see where Susan Bates, where they got their inspiration from. This is a bone hook. Now, the person who sold me this hook did say it came from the 1880s. And that is not a dirty head. That is a stained head. You can see that when it's next to something that's wider, you can really see just how dirty that head looks, but it's not dirty, it's just stained. And they're always bent. I've noticed the bone hooks are always bent, but so whenever they call for a bone hook or an ivory hook, this is essentially what they mean. What kind of bone? In the Victorian era, it was whale bone mostly, especially coming from the UK. There was a lot of whaling. And so largely it was whale hook. And as bone hooks were becoming popular in most places around the world in that era, it was bovine or like water buffalo, but more or less a land creature. So, and in the early 1900s, they were still making bone hooks and people were still making their own bone hooks at home. A lot of people still lived on farms. And it was bovine or horse if you lost your horse, or whichever. Pig legs are really strong, so probably pig as well. But basically barnyard animals, whereas the Victorian era hooks, these older ones here, these are made of bone, or whale, forgive me. These are made of whale. Okay. So when they call for bone hook, these are the hooks they're talking about. I have some antique hooks here too. I haven't really had a lot of luck using them as they're usually pretty messed up and snag, or like in the case of this hook I was just holding up, will turn your white yarn dingy. Some of them I have played with quite a bit. This one here I cleaned up. I have played with quite a bit. They're great hooks. These here, these are from 1911. You can see right here, they are Evelyn, patented 1911. And this is a size 2, and it'll even tell you the company it patented it for. It is MSC Luster. I'm guessing that is a yarn company. The majority of patterns came from yarn companies, unless they were books like the Beatons. This is not a yarn company. They just simply are into needlework, and that's why they made a book for needlework. But majority of your old school hooks, including these. Oh, I hooked my couch. Okay. You're going to find that they all come from yarn companies selling patterns. And isn't that interesting? And this is actually one of my better hooks as far as antique hooks go. This is one of my better shaped hooks. So yes, I have a lot of antique hooks. Like these too. And these I think are handmade, homemade. I do have other handmade hooks. This one here is handmade. So that is the best I can tell you is, when wanting to start reading vintage and antique crochet, determine if you're using a UK or US pattern. Look for the term single crochet. If it doesn't exist and the pattern clearly looks like there's single crochets in it, speaking on US terms, it's probably a UK pattern. If they use words like miss instead of skip, that's going to be a UK pattern. And also get to know your stitch definitions. You can find a lot of this stuff online, just like I did. I downloaded a lot of old books, and in those old books, you learn what the stitch definition is. Now, there is one fun stitch that some people hate, a lot of people love, and it is the granny square stitch. But I found the oldest pattern I found using that stitch is from 1846, and they called it the Van Dyke stitch. Then I saw that name again in the 1850s and again in the 1860s. I haven't really seen it in any other patterns beyond the 1870s. But it is the Van Dyke stitch, where you work 3 double crochet all into one stitch or into one chain, one space. So we don't even use that stitch. And that stitch went from being a Van Dyke to being a cluster, to being a fan, to being a cluster, to being the granny square stitch. So that stitch has had a lot of history. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to make a follow-up video. If anything I said was too confusing or too all over the place, as I did this with no script, please let me know, and I'm happy to make a follow-up video getting more in depth with what your questions are, as long as the majority of the questions are the same, because I can't answer 75 questions. That's just a lot. Okay, guys, I will see you really soon in another video. I've got 2 really fun patterns coming up, and they are not mystery patterns. Justin is currently working on mystery patterns, which is what inspired me to make this video, because he's going through all of these books, and I thought to myself, man, with almost 200 years worth of patterns there, I think I need to make a how to understand this thing, because there's just a lot to it, and we really didn't even cover it all. There's just so much to it. So he is currently in the arduous process of replenishing our bowl, and so that's going to take a little while. So in the meantime, I'm going to put out a couple of videos of dedicated patterns, and I really think you're going to enjoy both of them. Okay, guys, I'll see you real soon. Bye.